Looks like everything is pretty much good. Hmm. Well, everything is all good so far. So, aloha, and we are back onto this article again. Hmm. The rising to greatness. Oh, 90 dog, 90 dog, 90 dog. We're gonna go back to where I left off. Get back to it. I did remember the cute little sponges rat under the Donkey Kong, or by Donkey Kong, and the rest of Nintendo. Here, Donkey Kong, Nintendo, all the creatures, this wonderful, adorable, derpy face. Just gets surprising. And, you know, the rest here. Besides that, I'll just go on and I'll just read this part. Andy and Jason had SGIs and we're using Power Animator to work on this video game, Korotsky concluded. I was like, oh, I really want to learn this. They basically just said, why don't you come work with us? That's how I start at Naughty Dog. Our first days of work were seeing these closed door meetings showing the PSX, showing Ridge Racer on the PSX. Korotsky's first day at work was January 5th, 1995. He was Naughty Dog employee number 2 behind Dave Baggett, not Baguette. And his first day of work coincided with CES in Las Vegas. He was sharing a room with Jason and Andy at the Imperial Palace. Naughty Dog artist Bob Rafi and I were sleeping on the floor. Jason and Andy was sleeping in a king-size bed together. Our first days of work were seeing these closed-door meetings showing the PSX, showing Ridge Racer on the PSX, and us just going, what the fuck is this? We were trying to figure out the game we wanted to make. End quote. The game would eventually become Crash Bandicoot was the result of trying to take advantage of the trend in this industry. Much like Way of the Warrior was created as a response to the fighting game craze, Crash was a product of gaming's move to 3D and the result of approaching 3D gaming in a very specific way. And you have two women fighting each other. It looks like to the death. Looks like a Japanese version of Street Fighter. Virtual Fighter in action. What I meant by Japanese Street Fighter is just, oh my god, it looks like a much more cartoony version of it. Which is saying something. But this goes to show how just a picture can showcase something, especially in the background art, the characters. Or maybe this is my ape brain not used to art that had such meaning, especially when it came to pixelated art and how people are just used to it, and I'm just not used to it. Games were much more realistic to people who are not used to realistic or photorealism on art like people are nowadays. Games were in a transition at this time, Gavin explained. Certain genres in the arcades had just gone to 3D. It was clear that this was the direction things were headed as the 3D hardware was coming out, but it was very early. No. It was really early. The first one to go was racing. Fighting games were just beginning to go with Virtua Fighter. Gavin and Ruben shared an affinity for side-scrolling platformers and figured out that Virtua Fighter could put fighting games into a 3D mode. They could do it with the platformer. They specifically loved the Super Nintendo smash hit Donkey Kong Country. We were like, how would this work in 3D? Gavin continued. It was much more difficult to question then, because it's a more open kind of game. We eventually had what we jokingly called the Sonic's Ice idea. Sonic's Ash idea. In other words, a platform with a camera behind the main character that would follow him around. Games were in a transition at the time. Certain genres in the arcades had just gone to 3D. There were three things we come up with after deciding to create a 3D platformer, Ruben said. One, just rotate it into 3D, but it's still side-scrolling. Two, go in and out of the camera, figure out how to do it, but keep it confined still, because it's still a platformer game with a linear progression. Or three, full open. We didn't think we could do a full open at the time. Quote. Ironically, developers working on behalf of Sony, Sega, and Nintendo all came to the same conclusion about 3D gaming. And each company chose a different course for their new respective system flagship game, giving players a real choice while showing that the 3D landscape wasn't very predictable at all. Part 2, or Subpart 2, Sony versus Sega versus Nintendo. The mid-90s introduced the first true three-way battle for the video game console supremacy, with Nintendo and Sega going head-to-head with SNES and Genesis. SNES and Genesis, two heads. It was natural that they would battle again with Nintendo 64 and Sega Saturn, but Sony too would join the fray with PlayStation, a console that at the end of the war would end up outselling its competition combined nearly three times over. Oh boy, this glorious OG PlayStation console. Not the slim one, which I really love, especially with it being portable compared to this, but This box entered the generation as an underdog. It would outsell its competition, buying nearly three times though, especially with the history of PlayStation was supposed to work with Nintendo, but some business really made Sony just dip their toes in it just to showcase their true potential and to Nintendo. Still, there was one thing Sony lacked, a mascot. Sega had Sonic, Nintendo had Mario, but Sony had nothing at all. But with Crash Bandicoot, Naughty Dog was about to change all that, but Sony wasn't necessarily in the market for a mascot yet, and the small team behind the game had no idea the product even had that kind of potential. First, they had to figure out what their game was and how they actually go about making it. Sega had Sonic, Nintendo had Mario, but Sony had nothing at all. Sony had Sonic, Nintendo had Mario, but Sony had nothing at all. I got 3 axes down pretty well. I've been this entire day with it, and so far if I have no issues, then let's hope that that's something I've mastered and I could actually play around with more accents, more voices. PlayStation, like 64 and Saturn, supported full 3D polygonal games, but those machines couldn't handle that many polygons, Gavin admitted. Dave Baggett figured out a way to get around the PlayStation's inherent limitations by, among other things, creating the DLE, or Dave's Level Editor. With Gavin and Baggett, all was pretty well on a technical level, but Naughty Dog still needed to settle on a final idea to sit alongside its fixed camera behind the character approach. Thankfully, the team finally had the time and money to really sit and think. After keeping their heads down to formulate an idea, they once again went back to the idea of a 3D Donkey Kong Country, but they still needed a character concept. We weren't in school for the first time, but for the first time, all of these things came together. And this became a real job with a real budget and real employees and real attention to detail, Ruin said. The character design of Crash Bandicoot happened over a long period of time. We used cartoon animators in Hollywood to come in and concept with us. Charles Zambellis and Joe Pearson, we had real concept design from them. From Looney Tunes. The people from Looney Tunes. Looney Tunes was the inspiration of how Crash would ultimately look. Especially with it being a bit anthropomorphic. Even though in appearance he just looks like a freaking cheese Dorito. Each whole camera on a rail and pre-computing and throwing out all the stuff you weren't going to see the game use. It was crazy. It was super bizarre, Kowalski explained. We had an art staff of 3 people. It was Jason, Bob, and I. That was the art team. We were all just doing the same stuff. At the concept of Crash Bandicoot grew, I think I made the first Wumpa fruit. But as we started to figure out what we were good at, Bob became basically the background department. Bob did almost every background in Crash Bandicoot. Jason became the animation department. He did all the animations. I became the game designer, and we all pitched in for each other. But those were different. They were the different paths we handled. And together, they handled the design of Crash Bandicoot as a character. For the longest time, Crash's name was Willy the Wombat. Donkey Kong Country may have been the biggest inspiration to the team from a gameplay perspective, but it was Looney Tunes that ended up being the biggest inspiration from character design point of view. Me doing this is actually carrying a bit of a cadence, but I am realizing that if this cadence can be a way people speak, it could be a potential voice. Similar to those transatlantic voices. Let me see how that would play. As Crash's design came into focus, complete with 32 polygons and the ability to be fully animated as he lacked a fixed skeleton, he started to resemble something from Warner's classic cartoon series. But what about a name? For the longest time, Crash's name was Willy the Wombat. That's what we had to settle on. No one really loved it, Kowalski admitted. As he explained, he was about to pretty mature that he and David Baggett ultimately came up with the Crash moniker. I wanted it to be the Crash Monobot. I wanted it to be Crash Wombat. To this day, I think Crash Wombat rolls off the tongue better than Crash Bandicoot. Okay, yeah. Practice. Super Mario 64 and Knights from Sega versus N64. The Dungeons Mario 64 and Sega Knights into Dreams were Crash's big 3D competition. Yeah, especially with which one survived the most. But for hindsight, PlayStation, man, they really have an issue with struggling with mascots, especially with nowadays where they're looking and actually making the 2 characters of Last of Us, and then later Uncharted, which it does show it's an evolving thing, which it doesn't sit right for people who want to have a long franchise to stick with and to appreciate, like the Mario series or like the Halo series. Even though Halo hasn't had much of a different, long-lasting legacy compared to Crash. Crash can easily be like Halo, but it just didn't set that crosswords. And it does showcase that even if I read more about Naughty Dog, it's not going to talk about the other things like Sony and some other companies related to it. Like I came out thinking of Skywalker. Anywho, let me practice again. We were right. Meanwhile, Nintendo had something up in its sleeve that would end up revolutionizing 3D gaming. Super Mario 64, Sega 2 was working on its own 3D game for Saturn called Nights into Dreams. I'm having the appropriate cadence, but not an accent. None of the first parties have any ideas of its competitions were working on 3D games on their own. One predicted on each of the branches Ruben and Gavin identified during their road trip from Massachusetts to Southern California. I got the It was around this time when the idea of the game really started to come together, and Naughty Dog took the first steps toward solidifying its relationship with Sony. Today, Sony has been incredible indie friendly, but it was nice to smaller studios back in PlayStation's heyday as well. Sony would eventually rely on studios like Naughty Dog to make its console competitive. And Ruben and Gavin, as the co-founders of the studio, were the 44th and 45th individual developers to sign on with PlayStation. Though Sony's realization that it needed a game like this was just in the nick of time. I couldn't leave it at last impression. Yeah. Sony had this weird thing that very few people have, where you could have a dev unit as an independent developer under the different deal. Gavin explained, you didn't really have to any terms of getting manufacturing done, but they licensed you as the right to do the development under the assumption. Development under the assumption that you find a publisher later, even though Naughty Dog already have a deal with a publisher. Fledgling company was technically on its own because the publisher didn't own them. This helped them gain easier access to the tools of PlayStation development without all the paperwork, red tape, and ultimately oversight. Sony Computer Entertainment. SCE identified Crash Bandicoot as its mascot. Sony figured out it was a hacker thing. Ruben continued, if you got to the point where you could actually develop a game, you would take it to a publisher, and the publisher would have to review it. Naughty Dog was the contractor for Universal, never working for them, so we developed our dev unit at Alpha said to Sony, we've got your mascot game, and Sony have never seen it. They knew everything that was of any value that was being worked on, but they have never seen Crash. Yes, I'm actually developing something. Except my mouth is now it's tired, so I just switch back to accents just to refine them and also to relax. This is a good start, especially with me analyzing and reflecting back what I've learned today. To show Sony that they were working on, the team used Karofsky's connection with the Sequest DSV staff. He and Gavin sat on the TV show's editing bay for 2 days creating a demo to give to Sony. Gavin then handed the tape off to a friend who he asked to casually pass it along to the higher ups at the company. He said, the head of Sony Computer Entertainment America was like, what is that? That looks so good. That's how it snowballed, Gavin recalled. Having a certain rhythm that is different from my own while doing a quote and not doing a voice can actually mimic the person quoting like another person speaking versus me just spilling out like just reading off the quote. That's another thing. Well, after seeing the tape, Sony sent down people and they looked at it and their jaws dropped. Ruben continued, Sony's realization that it needed a game like this was just in the nick of time, he explained. We had no idea what Minamoto was doing at the time. Miyamoto. My bad. Alright. Sony had calmed down, and sure enough, this was their luck played at part. Sega had Sonic. In this case, they have decided to do Knights. Mario, obviously, and Nintendo were coming on. Sony had no Mascot. From Alpha 2 or 3 months before E3, they kicked their number one product off the number one slot right next to Nintendo's booth and put Crash there. Sony signed a deal with Universal to the publisher. It went head to head with Mario. The first time we had ever seen Mario 64 was at that E3.
We had no idea what Miyamoto was doing at this time,
Grosky, it said.
We had no idea about Mario 64. When that came out, we were a month away from finishing the game. We were like, oh fuck, that badass. That's a whole lot next level.
Oh shoot. That broke up the momentum for me. But they couldn't do the density of environments that they were doing.
It was a trade-off.
Yeah, this character that people really don't remember. Yeah. Crash and Mario went head to head. Knights fell by the wayside. Aww. That E3 solidified for Ruben that his gut instinct of there being three ways of going, 3D was right. 2D that was Knights, our middle to the road, in and out, but still platformer, was Crash Bandicoot. And full open world was Mario 64. We were all chosen one of the 3 ways of going. Yeah. Instead of just keeping a standard rhythm, we should just mix it with the rhythm but still keep the same tone. If I am making sense. I want to put that.
And it was very independent of each other because we were all so secretive.
Gavin chimed in. Oh shoot. Okay. I didn't like the fixed 2D of Knights, Ruben admitted. That's a cop-out. I think Sega realized that and didn't do Sonic with it because they didn't feel comfortable about it. The gameplay itself was weak, so in reality there was really only 2 viable options because Knights was proof that the third branch may not even been the wisest to take.
We want we way. We went on. We went one way, Mario went the other.
Let me just see this again.
We went one way, Mario went to the other. Robin said Mario 64 was an incredible game. The thing that makes Mario 64 from a consumer standpoint perhaps not as competitive is that visually it was nowhere near what Crash was, and that was because as soon as they opened up, you had a lot more polygons to draw in the distance. Just visually, it was never where Crash was. Yeah,
I actually lost the accent there. Oh well. You can take endlessly about which was a better game. From a consumer standpoint, Crash looked amazing, and that got us a lot of kudos. Now, on Crash 1, reviewers said, it's not Mario, but we ended up selling more than Mario, partly because the PlayStation had more users, but also because it was a very good game, and we continue to outsell Mario through Crash 2 and Crash 3. CTR, Crash Team Racing, did extremely well, and I think it outdid Mario Kart in terms of sales. Editor's note, Mario Kart 64 outsold CTR. Crash Team Racing.
Mario had a bigger learning curve too, Gavin interjected. It was much more of a groundbreaking game in a lot of ways because it had an innovative in so many gameplay areas, but it was a tough game to get your head around the first time. You had to get used to the 3D, get used to the controlling the camera. The camera is very frustrating. That's been solved since, but you had to then figure out what the hell you're going to do.
Crash, just being smiley, raving, and all that. The end result, courtesy Wikia. Remember, this is the first time most gamers were experiencing 3D, Ruben said. Certainly with a freely moving camera, driving games were always free roaming, but this was the first time anyone had to deal with this. Yes, gamers will always get it, but the mass market. The mass market. The PlayStation was the first mass market gaming machine. They got crashed. It had a button to jump and a button to spin and the directions. It was easier to play. Oh, I didn't see that it was actually part of the quote. Oh.
Your short-term goal and crash is always very obvious,
Gavin noted.
It's just moving forward and stay alive. In Mario, it was like, well, what do you have to do here? You have to open a drain and flood this, or whatever. It was kind of hard to figure out at the first. It was brilliant in its own way, and the way we communicated with that without any real language, but there was just definitely a steeper learning curve.
It's obvious that the free 3D world of Mario 64 became very important. It's also easy to discount Crash's world. Ironically, Karofsky notes that he thought that Crash was too hard. Way too hard. Way too hard, he said of the game. I feel so bad. This was, again, the first video game I had worked on. I have worked on. Just realized another accent. I should practice this. I feel so bad. This was, again, the first video game I had worked on, and I had never done game design, but I was the lead game designer in the department of one. I had no concept of increasing the difficulty, and then allowing the player to play as the difficulty for the period of time. No concept, and in my mind, literally every single jump was slightly harder than the one that came before it. I watched my mom played it, and I just said, please play Crash 2. Yeah, that sounds more an impersonation, because it doesn't sound much different than me speaking in a long-term voice like this, and my normal voice right now. So, yeah, and that will be in a line of impersonation of a particular voice. The actor, rather than a person, a individual that can have sort of similar noises and stuff. Oh well. At least I have the transatlantic accent that I'm still working on. It's obvious that the free 3D world of Mario Kart was very important, Rowan admitted. It was also easy to discount Crash's world, but if you looked Free Runner, which is an extremely popular game, it was forced for left, right, jump gameplay mechanic that directly takes from our hog level in Crash 2 is identical gameplay, and we were the first in our 3D game. So there was no question that it descends from us because nobody else was doing the kind of stuff at the time. Part 3, The Rise of the Mascot. Alright, I'm going to put an accent here. Crash Bandicoot launched exclusively on PlayStation. In late summer of 1996, Sam Thompson, a longtime Sony producer, joined the company the next year. He started a QA, working as a junior tester on the games hailing from studios ranging from the Square to Psygnotics, later named Sony Liverpool, to 989 Sports. He later rose up to the ladder and now works exclusively with Naughty Dog on Sony's behalf, but when he started at Sony, it was Crash Bandicoot that got him through the door. Alrighty. It's interesting because Sony never really wanted to have an accent. Mascot. They wanted to put the brand first and foremost. It's interesting, yeah. I'm tired. At least it is close. Well, anyhow. And this is the image of Crash 1 and Crash 2. The good old Mascot Crash Bandicoot. And it's obvious that the free 3D world of Mario 64 became very important. Yeah. On to part 3, The Rise of Mascot. Besides that, that pretty much ends my session today. Other than that, aloha.